A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Well, on a Monday, we like to check in with the Australian Christian Lobby. Michelle Pearse is the CEO of the ACL. Back with us. Hey, Michelle, welcome back to 2020.
Thanks, Neil. Great to be here with you today.
Michelle, let's just start perhaps a thought or two from you around the Dunkley by-election on the weekend in Melbourne, and an important one. People have been talking about it as being a bit of a litmus test. Is the community sentiment shifting? Any thoughts from you on the outcome from the weekend?
Sure, yeah, we can definitely see a swing away from Labor and towards the Liberals, and I think there's a whole range of reasons for that. We know people are responding to the cost of living crisis, but even beyond that, I think the no result on The Voice, the seemingly little action to combat anti-Semitism, it'll be even more interesting now to see the outcome as you just but we are seeing this swing away from Labor quite interestingly.
Okay, there's a lot to cover in our update today. Let's talk about the Human Rights Commission. The Australian Human Rights Commission is conducting a national project mapping threats to trans and gender diverse human rights in Australia. What's happening here?
Yeah, I mean, the purpose of this kind of inquiry, which we're seeing many forms of these around the nation, is we can see the purpose really is to entrench transgender ideology into every sphere of society. Where it's not enough that we've already got it within our education systems. This is looking at how they can infiltrate this ideology into civil society, into education and employment and healthcare and housing and migration and service provision and the law. These are the bodies that the Human Rights Commission have identified that need to be looked into to see if there is any kind of discrimination for transgender people within these areas. But really, we know that the agenda here is to infiltrate this ideology into all of the spheres in our society. And some things that they label they want to investigate is things like misinformation, which we know is a dangerous word, extremism and radicalisation, and we wouldn't see ourselves as those who are, extreme or radical in the way that they're promoting that we are, but simply promoting a different worldview, promoting a Christian worldview has been linked to being called extreme or radical and things like that. And so we're very much against this kind of inquiry and the agenda that's behind it.
Let's pause here for a moment because in case there were listeners who missed what you just said, and sometimes good to just pause and talk about extremism and radicalisation, because, of course, as the Christian community in Australia, we certainly don't see ourselves extreme or radical, but because we have a biblical view of male and female and marriage, and we've got a view on what's happening with the way that the trans community is infiltrating every area of society, and that's affecting children into generation upon generation to come, that somehow or other we might be the ones to be seen as extreme or radical. That's something we ought to be concerned about.
Absolutely. I think what is extreme and radical is this transgender ideology within our public school system, and also the fact that Christians are the ones that are being labelled as those that are discriminating. And we are not discriminating. We simply have a view of male and female. It's a very traditional view. It's a view that's been held for, since the beginning of time. And now these simple scientific, biological, and for Christians, religious views in male and female are now being labelled as extreme and radical. And this is an attempt to remove this worldview out of society, out of law, out of education. And so this transgender ideology can continue to gain a foothold.
And I know that in these deliberations, there are going to be people making submissions, but you're thinking here, perhaps Christians might be declined on making a submission. Any reason why that might be the case?
That's right. So the Human Rights Commission have said that only experts in the area can hand in a submission. So we will be asking the Human Rights Commission, are we included in the list of those experts? We expect the answer will be no. We expect the answer for Christians within the community at large that the answer will be a no. And so we'll be making a complaint to the Attorney General, whose department funds the Human Rights Commission. We need to complain to the Sex Discrimination Commissioner and to the Minister for Women as well to ask why alternate views have been censored from this inquiry.
And of course, there are Christians who are experts in this field, so that might even be a special prod to say, hey, don't sit around, let others try and pick up the slack here. There might be some opportunity to make a submission. Let's move on. The Religious Discrimination Bill, Australian Law Reform Commission report is to be handed down by the end of March. What's likely to come from this?
Yes, so as your listeners know, that this has been a long-term campaign for the Australian Christian lobby. Wendy and I have gone to meet with Justice Rothman, who's the author, the writer of the Australian Law Reform Commission report. We don't expect it to be good. We don't expect that it's going to allow for Christians to continue to hire according to their faith. I actually went to see the Attorney General a few weeks ago, and I asked his office the question whether they will raise the bar on current restrictions on hiring practices in Victoria and Northern Territory. Their response was they can't touch state law. Now, we know there's protections in the Sex Discrimination Act that allow Christians to hire according to their ethos. However, Labor are planning to remove these protections. And so with if the government takes the recommendations from the Australian Law Reform Commission and poses a religious discrimination bill that actually doesn't deal with religious discrimination as well, and they remove the protections from the Sex Discrimination Act, well, we'll be in a situation across the country where Christian schools won't be able to continue to operate according to their religious ethos, all religious schools for that matter. And we know that the attacks are coming from everywhere. We know that already in Victoria and Northern Territory, Christian schools are under threat, but now the anti-discrimination draft bill has just been released in Queensland that also has the same sorts of recommendations that you can't hire according to your ethos. And so as the Australian Christian Lobby is continuing to campaign in this area, we'll be alerting our supporters very soon in terms of what they can do now. They've already done so much, but we just need to continue to push to protect parental rights in schooling and to protect the Christian ethos in Christian schools.
So that report coming end of March. That's not far away. And if you woke up this morning and you thought everything was good in the world, you might be shocked at the conversation we're having today with Michelle Pearse, who's the CEO of the Australian Christian Lobby. There's some other deepening issues that Christians need to be aware of, Michelle, and that's one thing around costs. There's a costs bill, and we've talked before about the deductible gift recipients issues that are also brewing along as well. But let's just touch on this human rights costs bill for a moment. What does that mean for Christian believers?
Yeah, I mean, you're right to say that it can be overwhelming when all of these different threats come against Christians and people of faith in general. And it seems like every week there's another threat and we have to arrange another campaign, another response. Think very strategically in terms of how we're going to approach each and every issue to try to make a difference and to activate Christians as well. But yes, you're right on the human rights cost bill. So this is you'd read this bill and you wouldn't think anything of it until you look closer. And what we see in this bill is that if an activist makes a claim against a Christian for discrimination, which new laws will allow them to do more of that, if a Christian is found guilty on even one small aspect of an anti-discrimination law, they could be accused of a whole range of issues. But if they're just found guilty on one small thing, they will not only have to pay their own costs, but they have to pay all of the costs of the claimant. And so we see this as another avenue of ways that Christians can be silenced. And Christians won't want to be in any situation where they're accused of anti-discrimination, which means the silencing of our beliefs. And, it has a chilling effect. Christians don't want to be taken to the courts. And so, at times they would rather not say anything. But that's very dangerous because we risk losing our distinctiveness as Christians if we allow those sorts of things to chill us into silence.
We don't want to be silent. We want to have a free voice. But there's a threat coming that says, well, if you are dragged before some sort of anti-discrimination commission and anything that you say may well be considered to be maybe crossing the line, you'll have to pay not only your own costs but also the costs of the claimant as well. It's like an open invitation, isn't it, to attack Christians? So just be mindful of that as we're continuing our conversation today with Michelle Pearse. Michelle, this deductible gift recipients, that's also brewing along. That affects people who've got, particularly Christian schools, and anytime there's a deductible gift recipient opportunity, tax deductibility when you're making a donation, that's also bringing the church into focus here.
That's right. And I think it's a reflection of the growing secularization of our society and the anti-religion component that's coming through. We've known for so long, and I think it's been really valued in Australia, the types of benefits that religious institutions bring to society. But when they're threatening to take DGR status on support for the practice of religion, this really puts faith organisations in a difficult position when it comes to fundraising, and also the failure to acknowledge the community-wide benefits that religious organisations, religious charities do bring to society. So it's another reflection of this anti-religious sentiment.
Let's talk gender for a few moments. The World Health Organization, the Royal Australian New Zealand College of Psychiatrists, revised guidelines. What's coming here? Yeah,
so on a positive note, we see that the World Health Organization and leading health bodies such as the Royal Australian New Zealand College of Psychiatrists have stated that there's not enough evidence to inform the provision of medical interventions for gender-affirming care. Now, we know this. This is very obvious, but finally, leading medical bodies are coming out and agreeing with this. There's not enough evidence. We know that in the Melbourne Children's Hospital that it was quoted that children as young as 3 years old are being seen for gender issues. So we've actually put in a Freedom of Information request to actually find out how many 3-year-olds are being seen in the gender clinics. This is absolutely unacceptable, and talk about extreme and radical. This is what extreme and radical is. Neil, we need to see an inquiry into this issue in one of our parliaments at least this year, and I believe that we can. I think that it's very possible to see a gender inquiry with the amount of the community that are very concerned about this. Parliaments have to respond.
We came very close, didn't we, in South Australia, and somehow or other the numbers just voted down the inquiry at the last minute. And as I understand it, the Premier in South Australia, Peter Malinauskas, failed to support an inquiry. But as you say, something has to happen somewhere.
Absolutely. There's been various attempts in Victoria. Yes, the Premier in South Australia didn't support it. We're continuing to have conversations with the South Australian government to see if they'll do another type of inquiry. But the Senator Alex Antic had a childhood gender transition prohibition bill that he was aiming for it to go to a committee for a hearing. So at least there'd be some sort of investigation into this. Now, interestingly, he only lost getting that to committee by 4 votes, which shows that the parliament is quite divided on this. It's not the case anymore where the majority are agreeing with the gender ideology. I think the fact is that they're afraid to stand on our side of the issue. But I think as time goes on, more and more courageous people are seeing how children are being, misled and deceived in this and led down the path of medicalisation, and are going to stand up and are going to vote to have these sorts of inquiries. So we'll see it happening more and more in our nation.
There's so many issues to tackle, Michelle. Let's touch on basic online safety expectations, because so many of us in our social media, we want to get involved in debates. and there's potential risk in doing so with misinformation, disinformation, and the way you might be perceived. What's happening in this area of online safety?
Yeah, that's right. We had a big campaign last year against the misinformation, disinformation bill. We know that the definition for misinformation was so broad that it was likely to encapsulate anything that Christians would say, especially as we're talking on the transgender issues, but abortion, and anything we could say that would be reasonably likely, as the definition said, to cause or contribute to serious harm. And this harm can be psychological as well. So if we said something about abortion, that could be harmful to women, or something about transgender that would be harmful to people struggling with gender issues. Now, we know that's not the intent of Christians, to harm or to hate or anything like that, but we know in the political sensitivities that especially online platforms are likely to take it down because they don't want to be accused of allowing this sort of hate or harm on their online platform. So we thought that we were that the government had stepped away from the misinformation bill, but now we see within the BOSE determination, so that means basic online safety expectations, that they're actually doing the same thing, but in a more administrative way rather than a new draft bill. So those same kinds of definitions of hate and harm will be in these new online safety expectations. So I met with the online safety team in Canberra here, and I told them that we are very concerned about these definitions and how they limit free speech. And so they actually want me to arrange a group of other Christian organisations as well as us that are threatened by these sorts of recommendations, for them to hear our points of view in terms of how to protect freedom of speech in amongst getting rid of the actual harms online, like the AI harms, the pornography harms, but still maintain freedom of speech on issues that are important to Christians.
I know listeners can hear how busy you and your team of state directors are. Let's talk about Queensland for a few moments. The prostitution bill, because there's already legal brothels in Queensland. Now there's a move for full freedoms for people working in sex work. Give us your insight here into what's happening in the state of Queensland.
Yeah, I mean, a big attempt when it comes to decriminalising prostitution is to remove the stigma, to legitimise it as normal work as any other business. And when you do this, you'll see an infiltration of human sex trafficking, more so than it is now in Queensland. You'll see the proliferation of brothels as they can establish themselves anywhere. They can't be refused on the grounds of, that say somebody doesn't want it next to a school, or they can't be refused just because of the type of work. Sex work will be normal work. So this is really, really dangerous, and we're encouraging all of your listeners and all of our supporters at ACL to put in a submission to say, I don't want a brothel next door. I don't want to see more women being exploited in this industry, and no doubt children as well, as the demand for this type of work, which isn't legitimate work, continues to increase.
And of course, some of the other states are already doing what is proposed in Queensland. One of those things that you might be thinking of as a parent, if you have your children who are at school leaver age, that they might be targeted at careers fairs, or they might be lured into a career in the sex industry. And it just is so overweighted with danger that you might wonder how anyone could be thinking that this could be a good move. Hey, prostitution in South Australia, that's also on the agenda there. Any quick comment on that?
That's right. So it's just sitting in the upper house at the moment, awaiting to come on for a vote. This is a positive move. This isn't legitimising prostitution. This is a bill that helps women to escape prostitution whilst criminalising the purchase of sex. So this does the opposite of what Queensland's doing. So we've been championing this kind of model for a long time, and we've got a campaign on our website as well for people in South Australia to continue to advocate for this model to pass.
Some more discussion coming about the Tasmanian state election coming up a little soon on the program too, about just over an hour away. The election's coming 23rd of March. Tasmanians will be off to the ballot box. I guess you've got some special meet the candidate gatherings coming as well, Michelle?
Yes, that's right. Tonight and tomorrow night, we've got Bass and Lions Meet Your Candidate Forum tonight. Franklin and Clark, we're holding one tomorrow night. So encourage anybody in Tasmania, if you're in one of those electorates, to get along to it. Also to have a look at our website for everybody in Tasmania, tasvotes.org.au. There we have a scorecard which we're focused on parental right issues, on where all of the candidates stand, or the ones we've had responses from anyway. We've got a questionnaire on there as well, so you can get well informed on the Tasmanian election, about the candidates and the parties stand on the issues, so you can definitely make an informed vote.
Let's quickly rush through some things because we're running short of time. In the ACT, they've got a euthanasia bill. What does that mean? They tend to take things way ahead of everyone else when it comes to euthanasia.
Yes, the bill currently before the ACT Assembly is the worst bill in the nation. There's no time frame to death. So you can imagine what that means. Sometimes of cancer diagnoses, they're not even life-threatening. However, if there is it could at some point lead to death, then they can have euthanasia. Now, we've seen the slippery slope of euthanasia all over the world. In some countries, euthanizing people with dementia, with mental illness, even with drug addiction. So it's terribly dangerous. We also, there's a bill being drafted in Northern Territory, and they're floating the idea of allowing euthanasia for mental illness. So this is very dangerous.
There's issues that are brewing in Victoria, in New South Wales, in the Northern Territory as well, and I'll have to point listeners to the ACL website to perhaps get some updates on some of those things that are developing in their own backyards. Let me just touch on one more before I let you go. There's a resolution's been moved at a local council level in Orange in New South Wales against a Mardi Gras-styled Pride Parade, and due to be hosted by the city. The council is meeting tomorrow night, 6:30 p.m, and in Orange there's an Orange Christian Alliance, and they're trying to get locals out and residents to come out and make a statement that this is not okay in Orange. And apparently, and I'll get your thought here, they've allocated $120,000 of funding to this gay festival that was purposed for the health of youth in the community. Any thoughts from you here, Michelle?
It's terrible, but absolutely unsurprising. But what I am encouraged about in hearing that report is a local group of Christians have formed an alliance to stand against this. And that's what it's going to take around the nation, is groups of Christians hearing what's going on and at a local level taking action. Now, ACL helps to activate on the big issues around the country, federal and state. But I'm so encouraged to hear even that local council level of groups getting together. And we do hear reports of this from time to time. So I encourage any listeners to, if you hear of anything coming up in your local area, get a group together, take action. Where necessary, ACL can come in and support, but I love to hear of community action on the ground.
Well, the need for local alliances to be able to tackle those local issues. And if you're a part of an alliance, you've got a formed alliance, somebody's going to be a spokesperson, your local media will be ready to listen. And if you want to be an influence in your town, in your community, there's a great lead from our CEO of the Australian Christian Lobby, who says, yes, get some local alliances happening. And Michelle, I know that people will be very impressed to hear that if they need some help getting that happening, that there might be some support there coming from the ACL as well. For listeners to follow through on some of the things we've been talking about today, check on some of the latest articles that are appearing on the Australian Christian Lobby website, acl.org.au, acl.org.au. Michelle Pearse is CEO of the Australian Christian Lobby. Michelle, thanks so much for a very wide-ranging update today on 2020.
Thanks, Neil. There's a lot going on, and thanks for having me.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.